Two researchers investigated the reliability of test assessment. One group consisted of 30 students who took proctored tests. A second group consisted of 32 students who took tests online without a proctor. The two samples were taken independently, not paired or matched, and here are the results. Group 1, which was proctored, had a mean of 70.29 and a standard deviation of 22.09. The non-proctored group had a mean of 74.26 and a standard deviation of 18.15. And we want to estimate the difference. So again, we see this is an estimation type thing, and we're looking at the difference. So this is a two-sample t interval that we're going to be doing. So let's go through our 5-step process. First step is to define our parameters again. So we're going to say that, well, they're already going to be group 1 and 2. So we can say the same thing. Mu1 is the true mean test scores for all proctored students. And mu2 would be the mean test scores for non-proctored. As we mentioned before, this is going to be a two-sample t interval. Since we're working with quantitative data, which gives us means, we're going to be using t since the standard deviation of the populations are unknown. So let's check our conditions independent. Well, it states that they were taken independently, and we can also assume that these are independently sampled, since we have tons of students who could possibly take an online proctored test or non-proctored test. But let's mainly talk about this point right here. So both groups are independent. Oops. Random. Actually, we don't know if this is a random sample, and it doesn't even look like it is. However, we're just going to make the assumption that these groups are at least representative of all test takers. That may be a bad assumption, but that's why we check these things, to make sure that we understand what are some of the drawbacks of what we're looking at here and how we gathered our data. And finally, of course, the main one, the large enough. And if it's not large enough, do we have a nearly normal approximation, or nearly normal, approximation for the distribution of our population? And we don't need to check that, because actually both groups have a sample size that are at least 30. So remember, we're checking both conditions for both groups, but both n are greater than 30, or greater than or equal to 30. So looks like we're good there. So let's move on to step 4, which is using our technology, whatever method you're going to use. I will use StatCrunch, which is shown here on the right. We're going to go to Stat, T-Statistics, and two-sample. So step 4. We're going to come up with our interval just doing this method. So as we saw, to get to the two-sample t interval, we're going to go to Stat, T-Stats, two-sample, and again, we have the summary statistics. We have the mean and standard deviation. We don't have the actual numbers for each student for the data. And it's going to ask us for those things that were given to us. So let's just put this in one by one. Our sample mean was 70.29. Our sample standard deviation was 22.09 for group 1. And our sample size was 30. And for sample 2, or group 2, we have 74.26. Standard deviation is 18.15. And our sample size for this one was 32. Now this pooled variances option, this is something that you may use later on, in the fact that all this does is we're assuming that the standard deviations or the variances are equal to each other for both groups. We're not going to make that assumption right now, so we'll just leave that off. And then finally, we're just going to go to confidence interval, since that's what we're doing. And it actually doesn't say what confidence we want, so we'll leave it at 95%. And compute. And there we go. Our difference is somewhere between negative 14.29 to positive 6.35. So we'll write that down. Right, and so remember, we did this using mu1 minus mu2. Sometimes we may want to actually write that here so we remember which order we did this in. So finally, step 5, let's write our conclusion. And it's the same conclusion we've been doing always, except remember, what are we looking for is not trying to capture a specific parameter, but a difference between these parameters. So we're going to be talking about, we are 95% confident that the difference in mean scores between proctored and non-proctored students is between our interval of negative 14.29 to 6.35 points. And there we go. 5 steps.